GHL just released some exciting new updates to their calendars. So in this video, I'm going to do a full walkthrough of the new interface and show you how to get your calendars all set up from start to finish. So whether you're a complete beginner or you're a high-level veteran, my goal for this video is to break this down as clearly as possible to set you up for success. So with that being said, let's get into it. So within your GHL sub account, the first place you'll want to go is calendars and then calendar settings. So the first thing you'll notice is there's a lot going on here, especially if you're used to other platforms like Calendly. There's a lot of different settings that we can play with and adjust in GoHighLevel. I'm going to start from the top and work our way back to the actual different calendar types and give you a full demo of actually setting up a calendar from start to finish. So starting at the top, the first thing you'll want to do is click on connections. So this is where we're going to actually link your calendar and your video conferencing tools. So the first thing we'll do is go to calendars and add new. So based on what type of calendar you use, you can select it here. For the sake of this example, I'm going to do Google Calendar. I'll click connect. I'll link my Google account, click continue, click allow. And just like that, my Google Calendar has now been linked. So the next thing you'll want to double check is that your calendar shows under linked calendar. So this way the appointments that are booked through GHL actually sync to your Google Calendar, and that we have conflicts calendar is listed here. If you have any other calendars that you want to check for conflicts to make sure that there's no scheduling conflicts or double bookings, you can connect that calendar here as well and just list that as a conflict calendar. So the next thing we'll do is video conferencing. Once you've connected your Google Calendar, the Google Meet should be auto-connected. But if, for example, you want to add Zoom as well, we can just click Add New, click Zoom, and then we'll go through that same process. Okay, so now that we have our Zoom account linked as well, we should be good to go in terms of connections. So you just want to make sure you have your calendar of choice linked and you have your video conferencing tool of choice linked here. So assuming you've done that, we can move on. The next piece here is going to be your availability. So this is pretty straightforward. This is going to be your personal availability, the times that you are actually available to take appointments. So you'll set your time zone, the days of the week that you're available, and the specific times throughout the day that you're available to take appointments. Once you've done that, you can move on to preferences. So this is going to be your user preference in terms of where you actually want to take your meeting. So in this case, I personally like to take my meetings on Zoom. So I'll select Zoom, but you can select Google Meet. You can do your phone. You can do full address if you're actually meeting with clients or prospects in person. For the sake of this example, I'll just click Zoom, click save, and then we can move on to account preference. So we have our view options, what day of the week starts on, different services here. So you can configure these settings to your liking. For the services, the service menu, rooms, and equipments are typically going to apply to brick and mortar businesses. So if you're not a brick and mortar business, you can more likely than not toggle those off just to keep the interface a little bit cleaner and make things a little less confusing for you. But I'll touch on these in just a second on what they are. So once we've done that, we can come back to calendars. And then now we have our different calendar elements. So we have the calendars themselves. We have groups. So groups are just going to be a way that we can organize our calendars. Think of it like putting your calendars in different folders. So we might create calendar groups based on different departments within your organization. You can do it based on the different actual calendar types. You can do it based on different services, just a way that you can keep your calendars a little bit more organized. We have our service menu, rooms, and equipment. So again, these are going to apply primarily to brick and mortar businesses. Let's just say, for example, you're working with a spa and they have certain equipment that they have in their location. So this might be a laser hair removal machine. You could list that under equipment, and that way when that equipment is actually booked out, the system will know that the availability of the specific equipment of your business or your client's business. So same thing applies to rooms. You know, if that particular spa has 6 rooms available, we can list that, and then the calendar can book accordingly to the space that's available. And then once we've created groups, rooms, and equipment, we can actually build out a service menu for the specific services that your business or your client's business actually offers. With all of that being said, now we can jump into calendars. In order to actually create a calendar, we're going to click on Create Calendar. Here's where a lot of people start to get overwhelmed. There's a lot of different types of calendars, and it can be a little confusing to navigate what's what here. To break this down, we'll start with personal booking. This is probably going to be the event type that you might be most familiar with. If you're using something like Calendly, this is the closest equivalent. So this is just going to be a one-to-one meeting. You would have your personal calendar, and then you could send that to whoever you're meeting with, and then they would book in with you directly. The next one is going to be round robin. So this is also still a one-to-one meeting, but it just cycles a number of different people that might be on that calendar. So this is perfect for sales teams, for example. If you have multiple people on your sales team, you could throw them all onto that calendar. And then when prospects book on that calendar, it's just going to cycle through and round robin for all the people that are listed on that calendar. The next one is going to be class booking. So this is going to be a many to one type of booking. So perfect for webinars, workshops, online events, things like that, where you can get a lot of different people to book with one host who might be presenting for that class. Also great for gyms, for example, if they have different fitness classes that a lot of people can book in for that one class. Collective booking is going to be the opposite. So it's going to be one to many. So one person can book in with multiple people on your team. This might be great for interviews where multiple people on your team might be on that interview. That way the calendar can cross-reference the availability of all the people on your team that are on that booking and pick the times that are overlapping between all those people. Next, we have event calendar, which is more so for physical events. So if you're hosting any physical events, you can use that one. And then finally, we have service booking. So again, this is going to be mostly for brick and mortar businesses that are actually offering in-person services. So if that applies to you, then you can use service booking. So in my experience, the ones that are used most frequently are going to be personal booking and round robin booking. So for the sake of this video, those are the ones that I'm going to focus on. So let's go ahead and start with personal booking. So we'll give the calendar a name. You'll select your team member. You can also add a description if you want. We'll give it a custom URL. So we'll call it Meet with Talon. You can set the meeting duration, set your availability for the calendar, which there's a distinction between the calendar availability and your actual personal availability, which I'll touch on later in the video. And then we'll click confirm. So here, it'll just give you the share links if you want to share that link for the calendar. But we're going to go ahead and actually open up the detailed view for the calendar so we can walk through some of the more advanced settings here. So under meeting details, you can add a calendar logo. So if it's a personal calendar, you can just upload a photo of yourself. If it's a team calendar or a company calendar, you can upload a logo of your company. Again, you can adjust the description, add it to a specific group, which we touched on earlier, change the invite title. You can change this to whatever you want, set your team members here. And then this is an important piece. You want to make sure you set your meeting location to wherever you actually want that meeting to take place. So for me, as I mentioned, I like to take my meetings on Zoom. So I would select Zoom, and your Zoom account will need to be linked ahead of time. If it's not, you'll get an error here. But once you've done that, you can click save. So the next piece here is going to be setting the availability. As I mentioned, there's two levels of availability when it comes to GoHighLevel calendars. There's going to be the event level availability and then your personal availability. So the system is first going to check for the calendar availability, and then it's going to check for the specific users availability that are actually on that calendar. So it is possible that there can be some discrepancies or conflicts between those two availabilities, which is where I see some people getting a little confused. What I typically like to do is leave the calendar availability a little bit more wide open and then default to the specific user's availability. In either case, you can set your availability here. If you need to set any date specific overrides, you're going to be, out of the office for half of the day on specific days, or availability changes, you can add date specific overrides here. There's also some interesting options here that are relatively new. One is going to be the look busy feature. So this is basically going to be to make your calendar look like you're less available than you actually are, which is an interesting feature that GHL has. You can make that meeting recurring if you want. So here is also where a lot of people end up getting confused, are these settings in this section. So meeting interval is just basically going to be in what interval do we actually show those meetings on the calendar when people are actually booking. So do we want to display 30-minute slots? Do we want to display 60-minute slots? So on and so forth. We can set what those slots look like on the calendar here. The meeting duration is pretty straightforward. How long is the meeting actually going to be? The minimum scheduling notice is essentially what is that gap between right now and the earliest that someone can actually book an appointment. So if you don't want someone booking an appointment for the very second that they're actually booking the appointment, you want to give yourself a little bit of a buffer to maybe prepare for the call, you can set a little bit of a scheduling notice. So maybe that's 1 hour, 4 hours, whatever you want that to be. Next, we have the date range here. So this is actually going to be a really important setting. This is going to be how far out can the prospect actually book their appointment. So if you're looking to optimize and maximize your show up rates, typically the best practice here is to make that window as small as possible. So prospects aren't booking out, 2 weeks out in advance or a month later, where at that stage they've forgotten why they even booked that appointment. So I typically like to set this in the range of anything from 3 to 5 days, but you can decide what makes the most sense for your business. Maximum bookings per day is pretty straightforward. If you only want to take 6 calls in a specific day, you can put that here. Maximum bookings per slot per user. In most cases, it makes sense to leave this at 1. Pre-buffer time, how much time of a cushion do you want to add before the meeting? Same thing with post-buffer time, how much of a cushion do you want to add after the meeting in case you need to do any post-call work. So once you have all those set, you can click save. So the next section we have is forms and payment. So by default, GHL is going to have the default form, which is just going to be first name, last name, email address, phone number, and notes. So you can also create a custom form. If you go into sites and then forms, you can create your own customized form where you can add additional questions that you want to ask if you want to further qualify your prospects. I'm planning on making another video in the future that's going through how to actually make those custom forms and how to actually build out the workflows on the back end to automatically qualify and curate your leads. So if that's something that you're interested in, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Moving on, we have pre-populate fields, what's known as the sticky contact feature. So this is really, really handy. If a contact is already opted in and you have their information on file, you can switch this on and the system is just going to pre-populate that form with the information we already know about them. So that's going to increase your opt-in rates and just overall improve the performance of this calendar. So I would recommend having that checked on. We also have the consent checkbox, which for A2P compliance purposes is important to have switched on. We can allow the prospect to add additional guests to the calendar if we want. So we can toggle that on and off here. And then for the confirmation page, we have either a default thank you message, which I would recommend customizing this if you're going to use this option, or we could send them to a redirect URL of our choosing. So if you want to send them to a custom thank you page, you can add the URL to that thank you page here. And if you're running Facebook ads, you can embed your Facebook pixel directly onto the calendar by pasting it here. So for me, my personal best practice is actually to embed the Facebook pixel on a custom thank you page and redirect to that here. Again, that's the topic for a video I'm planning on making in the future, so stay tuned for that. And then we have auto confirm new calendar meetings. I would definitely recommend leaving that checked on. And then we have our payment section. So if you are accepting payments for that specific type of appointment, you can toggle this on. You will need to have your payment processor integrated, which you can just click here to connect your payment processor. If you've done that, you'd be able to switch this on and accept payments for this calendar. So moving on, we have our notifications and additional options. So this whole section is purely about notifications. We can decide which of these notifications we actually want sent and to who and when. So I won't go through each and every one of these as these are pretty straightforward, but you can just click edit, decide whether you want this enabled or disabled. Do the same thing for the in-app. Who do these notifications actually go out to? So you could do this from the calendar settings, or a lot of these notifications you can set up through custom workflows. So that's going to be totally up to you. Again, workflows is going to be a topic for a video in the future. But moving on, we have allow Google/Outlook to send invitations and updates to attendees. I would 100% have that checked on. Google's emails are definitely going to be delivered to your prospect, whether your emails are actually sent out or not. So this again can help increase show up rates. Assign contact to the respective calendar team members each time an appointment is booked. Yes, I would recommend having this clicked on. And then for skip assigning contacts, I would keep off. So here we have our cancellation and reschedule policy. So if you want to allow or disallow rescheduling or cancellation, you can toggle that here. And then you can also set, if you want those options to expire a certain time before the meeting, you can set those here. And then finally, we have our additional notes. So if you have any additional information you want to include in the notes section, you can add that here, and then that will reflect on the meeting that's actually booked on the calendar. And then moving on to our last section here, we have our customizations. So we can also upload a cover image for our calendar here. We can decide the widget style, whether we want it Neo or Classic. In my opinion, I think Neo looks better, so I typically always leave it on Neo. And then we could set our colors. So if we want our calendar to be branded, we can put our brand colors here. We can adjust the button text, and then we can toggle on or off the different elements of the calendar that we actually want to be displayed. Once you've done all that, you can preview the widget. If you're a little bit more advanced, you can also include custom code here to just take your customizations to the next level. For most of you, you probably won't need to do that. Even just adding in your brand colors and brand images should be more than enough. So once you've done all that, you can click save. And that is pretty much it in terms of how to set your personal booking. Next, I'll go over the round robin booking. So it's going to be pretty much exactly the same. But again, this is going to be more so for example, if you want a sales team calendar. This way we can add multiple people to the same calendar and have those appointments cycle through all of the people that are on that calendar. So in this case, maybe we'll call it a demo call. Here we can select the team members we want on it. So in this example, I'll just add 3 users. Okay, so the slugs will need to be unique. So I'm just gonna type in this. We'll set the meeting duration. Again, set your availability. Will be pretty much exactly the same as before. I'll click confirm. It'll give you the sharing link. You can preview the booking widget if you want. I'll click close. So we'll click into edit calendar. Again, we can add a calendar logo. In this case, if it's a team calendar, you might want to upload your company logo. All of the settings are basically the same as before. But the key thing I want to highlight here with the round robin calendar is that now that we have multiple people on this calendar, we have the option of how we want to actually distribute the appointments. So we could either optimize for availability or optimize for equal distribution. In my opinion, what usually makes the most sense is to optimize for availability. When we do that, we have the option of setting priorities of the specific users on this calendar. So say, for example, it's a sales team calendar and you want to prioritize a specific closer over another one based on their performance or any other factors that you determine. You can set one person to high priority and another person to low priority. So that can be really, really useful. You'll also want to make sure that the meeting locations are set properly. In my case, since I like to use Zoom, I'll set Zoom here. If Zoom is not set here in the settings, the system is not going to automatically generate a new Zoom link and put that in the actual appointment on the user's calendar. So super, super important. If you want your prospects to actually show up for the appointments, probably a good idea to have those Zoom links in the appointment that's on their calendar. If you don't do this, the Zoom links won't be generated. So be sure to set your meeting location properly. Outside of that, basically all of the other settings are going to be exactly the same as the previous example. So I'm not going to go through it again. So once we've done that, we've created 2 separate types of events and meetings. Once you've created your calendars, a few other things that I want to mention is some troubleshooting steps in terms of some issues that people usually run into. The first issue is just going to be, I see a lot of people that maybe imported a calendar from a snapshot or a funnel from a snapshot, and the calendar shows up as a 404 error. And that's usually because the calendar actually hasn't been activated. So the way you could check that is just clicking the 3 dots here and seeing if it's active or not. If it's not active, it'll say activate calendar. If it is active, it'll say deactivate calendar. So you can also see the status here, whether it's active or inactive. So you would just click the 3 dots and either activate or deactivate the calendar. The second one is going to be Zoom not actually generating the custom links. So I already mentioned that. Step 1 is just to make sure you have Zoom set in the actual appointment settings. The second piece of it is, if you're ever having issues with this, refreshing your Zoom integration seems to fix the issue. So you can just disconnect Zoom, reconnect it, set it in your settings, and more likely than not, that'll fix the issue. The last troubleshooting step that I want to mention here is troubleshooting your availability. I see a lot of people having issues with this. So if your availability on your calendar is not showing up the way that you want it to, all you need to do is come to your calendar, click on the troubleshoot calendar button here. So this is one of the new features that GoHighLevel just recently released. And then you could look at the specific day that the dates aren't, or the availability isn't showing up the way you want it to, and it'll tell you why. So based on that, you can go through, adjust your availability or your settings as necessary, and fix the issue. So that is pretty much it, guys. With all that being said, hopefully you guys are feeling a little less confused when it comes to setting up your calendars on GoHighLevel. If you found this video to be valuable in any way, shape, or form, I would really, really appreciate it if you could drop a like on this video, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more in-depth GoHighLevel tutorials to help you scale your business. I'll see you guys in the next one.